Sarah Chen stood outside the courthouse with nothing but the clothes on her back and a leather briefcase filled with legal documents that said she'd officially lost everything. Her husband, Michael, had just walked away with their $2.8 million home, half of everything she owned, and a smug little smile like he'd just won a game he never deserved to play. As they stepped through the heavy glass doors, he leaned in close. She thought, for a fleeting, foolish moment, that he might say something soft. Maybe something about the 2 decades they had spent together, a final, quiet acknowledgement of the life they had built. He didn't. He looked her dead in the eyes, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "You're a pathetic workaholic who wouldn't know love if it came with a user manual." That sentence hit harder than anything his lawyer said in court. It was a perfectly crafted dagger, designed to pierce the one area of her life where she always felt she'd failed. He walked off with Jessica, her business partner, her best friend since college. Jessica didn't even look back. That night, Sarah parked her car in a deserted lot overlooking the city skyline. The glittering lights of buildings she had once aspired to conquer now mocking her spectacular fall. She curled up in the passenger seat, the fine Italian leather a cold comfort, and tried to pinpoint the exact moment she had lost control of her own narrative. Her life had just been rewritten by the 2 people she trusted most, and she hadn't even been consulted on the edits. She felt a deep, hollowing emptiness, the kind that comes after a system crash where all the data is irrevocably lost. Her phone buzzed, a text from her lawyer. It was one she had been dreading, the final nail in the coffin of her professional life. It was a simple, sterile message confirming the preliminary valuation of her company for the asset division. It was a number far too low, a fraction of its true worth, a figure that would force her to sell her majority stake just to pay Michael what the court said he was owed. He was taking her past, her present, and her future in one fell swoop. She closed her eyes, the screen of her phone casting a pale, clinical light on her face. This was it. This was the bottom. She had been betrayed, dismantled, and discarded. But as she sat there in the crushing silence, a tiny, resilient line of code flickered to life deep within her. It was a thought, an instinct she hadn't accessed in years, a piece of her original programming. It was the part of her that knew how to build something from nothing. And it whispered a question that would change everything. What if the system wasn't crashed, just in need of a hard reboot? Her name is Sarah Chen. She's 48 years old, and until last year, she thought she had built an unbreakable life. She wasn't born into money, but she'd worked relentlessly to architect something real, something of substance. She founded Chen Digital Solutions from her cramped studio apartment at age 25, fueled by a computer science degree, $5,000 in savings, and an unshakable belief that she could write better code than anyone else on the market. For over 2 decades, she poured every ounce of her intellect and energy into that company, transforming it from a one-woman startup into a cutting-edge software firm specializing in small business management systems. She believed in logic, in elegant solutions, in waking up before the sun to solve a problem, and going to bed long after midnight with the ghost of a new algorithm dancing in her mind. She thought that level of dedication was enough to secure a life. She and Michael met in graduate school. He was the charismatic MBA with a quick smile and an answer for everything. She was the quiet computer science prodigy who preferred the company of a command line to a crowd. He was drawn to her fire, her intense focus. She was drawn to his easy confidence, the way he navigated the world with a charm she could never quite master. In their early years, their marriage felt like the perfect merger. He worked in corporate finance, providing a steady income while she built her company from the ground up. She would code until 3 a.m., surrounded by takeout containers and scribbled diagrams, and he would appear with a fresh cup of coffee, a supportive smile on his face. He celebrated her first client, a small local bakery, as if she had landed a Fortune 500 contract. They were a team, a synergistic partnership. They bought a small starter home, celebrated their first profitable quarter with cheap champagne, and talked for hours about the empire they were going to build together. He was her biggest cheerleader, her sounding board, the one person who understood the sacrifices she was making. He was the business mind to her technical genius. Or so she thought. She truly loved him. Eventually, her company began to grow, then explode. Word of her innovative, user-friendly system spread. She secured bigger clients, hired her first employees, and moved into a real office. One year, a venture capital firm took notice, and an injection of funding changed everything. They went from a scrappy startup to a serious player in the tech world. That was when he suggested they buy the house. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling $2.8 million modern estate in an exclusive Connecticut suburb, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wine cellar stocked with vintages Michael selected, and a perfectly manicured lawn. He called it a home befitting her status. To her, it felt like a beautiful, sterile museum. She thought she was building a future for them. But something shifted after they moved in. The foundation of their partnership began to show hairline cracks. Michael started to change, or perhaps, the man he truly was began to emerge. He quit his job to manage their investments, which mostly involved golf games and long lunches at the country club. While she remained deeply immersed in product development and company culture, he became obsessed with the lifestyle her success afforded them. He talked more about their social standing and less about her latest software build. He'd gently chide her for wearing jeans to a dinner party or for checking work emails during a charity gala. She chalked it up to the pressures of their new world. People change. She figured she just needed to learn the new rules. Then there was Jessica. She was more than just a friend. She was the sister Sarah never had. They met in a university coding competition. Sarah won, but Jessica was the one who came over afterward to congratulate her and dissect her winning algorithm. Sarah hired her as the first employee of Chen Digital Solutions, eventually making her chief operating officer. Jessica was the operational engine to Sarah's strategic vision. They were inseparable. Jessica was her maid of honor, the person she called after a brutal board meeting, the one who knew every secret, every fear, every dream. When Sarah lamented that she was too busy building her company to have children, Jessica had squeezed her hand and said, "This company is your baby, and I'll always be its godmother." Sarah trusted her implicitly. She would have handed her the master key to her entire life. She never saw what was happening, because looking would have been too painful. Michael and Jessica started spending more time together. "Planning a surprise party for you," Jessica would say with a wink. "Going over the quarterly reports," Michael would explain, clapping her on the shoulder. He complained that Sarah was too tired, that she was always working, that she cared more about her laptop than her husband. She didn't argue. She just worked harder, thinking that if she could just secure the company's future, then she could relax. Then she could be the wife he wanted her to be. But the distance between them grew into a chasm. They stopped talking about anything real. He slept in the guest room more nights than not, claiming her late-night typing kept him awake. She'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how the elegant code of their marriage had become so corrupted with bugs. She kept thinking they just needed a patch, a simple fix to restore the system. But the truth was, the core programming was broken. He was already gone emotionally, and Jessica had helped him write the exit script. All that was left was the final execution. And even then, she didn't expect them to be so cruel. The real collapse wasn't a moment. It was a carefully orchestrated demolition. And it happened on the best day of her professional life. It was a Tuesday. She remembered the color of the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue, because it felt like a reflection of her future. She had just left a meeting in New York City where she'd signed a massive government contract worth $50 million over 5 years. This was the deal that would cement Chen Digital Solutions as an industry leader. It was the culmination of 2 decades of sleepless nights and relentless work. Her hands were still trembling with adrenaline as she drove home. She had a bottle of Dom Perignon on the passenger seat, the one Michael always said they should save for a truly monumental occasion. She had this naive, hopeful idea that maybe this triumph would be big enough to bridge the gap between them. Maybe they could sit on the patio, drink champagne, and feel like a team again. When she pulled into the long, winding driveway, she saw Jessica's car parked next to Michael's. Nothing strange about that. Jessica often came by to strategize or just to hang out. But something felt off. The house was too quiet, the air too still. She walked in through the front door, calling their names. Silence. She passed the kitchen, the living room, and then she heard a sound from upstairs. A laugh. It was soft, intimate, coming from their bedroom. Jessica's laugh. That same throaty chuckle she used to share with Sarah over a bottle of wine after a long week. But it wasn't meant for her this time. She didn't storm up the stairs. She didn't yell. Her mind was a computer running a million diagnostic scenarios at once, refusing to land on the most obvious, catastrophic conclusion. She walked up slowly, the grand, floating staircase feeling like a gallows. When she reached the bedroom door, she heard Michael's voice, low and murmuring, then Jessica's again. She opened the door. There they were. Her husband, her best friend. No shame, no panic. Just the kind of defiant stillness that follows when two people know they've been caught, but have already decided they don't care. Jessica scrambled to pull on a silk robe, one Sarah had bought her for her last birthday. Michael didn't move. He just sat on the edge of the bed, shirtless, and looked at her. His face didn't change. Not a flicker of guilt, only a cold, hard annoyance. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and said, in the calmest voice she'd ever heard, "You're early." The words were so absurd, so dismissive, they almost made her laugh. Early for what? For the final act of her own life's implosion? Jessica tried to say something, stammering about a misunderstanding, about work, something hollow and weak. Sarah wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on Michael. She waited for an apology, an explanation, anything. Instead, his annoyance hardened into rage. He stood up, his voice rising. "What did you expect, Sarah? For me to just sit around and watch you cuddle with your keyboard every night? You're never here. You care more about code than you do about conversation." He advanced on her, his words becoming weapons. "You built this whole empire, and you emasculated me with every brick you laid. I needed a partner, not a CEO." Jessica, seeing her opening, chimed in, her voice laced with a newfound venom. "He's right. You've become impossible to work with, Sarah. You micromanage everything. You don't listen. You think you're the only one with good ideas." Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, the champagne bottle feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. The betrayal was a physical force, knocking the air from her lungs. It wasn't just the affair. It was the narrative they had constructed, this twisted reality where her hard work was a character flaw, her dedication a form of neglect. It was a systematic destruction of her identity. She turned to walk out, unable to breathe in that room for another second. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the bottle. She went downstairs to her home office, sat in her chair, and stared at the blank monitors for what felt like an hour. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the secret meetings, the way they would finish each other's sentences. That night, she slept in the guest room. The champagne stayed in its box on the counter. The next morning, it was in the trash, and Michael had filed for divorce. There was no argument, no begging, no pretending. He was done, and he wanted what he now believed was his. Half, more than half, if he could get it. She tried to be civil, suggesting they use a mediator. He laughed and said, "You're the coder, Sarah, not the strategist. Let the professionals handle it." He hired one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state, a sharp, cold woman named Cynthia Davenport. Clean suit, predatory smile, eyes that saw vulnerabilities like a hacker sees security flaws. Davenport shredded Sarah's reputation in court. She painted her as an obsessive, emotionally unavailable workaholic who had neglected her marriage and driven her poor, supportive husband into the arms of another woman. She argued that Michael's emotional support and business advice in the early years were critical contributions to the company's success, entitling him to a significant portion of its value. The most devastating blow came from Jessica. She took the stand, now fully aligned with Michael's legal team, and delivered a masterful performance. She spoke of Sarah's erratic leadership, her inability to delegate, and her failure to maintain healthy relationships. She twisted years of collaborative partnership into a story of Sarah's tyrannical control and her own long-suffering brilliance. She painted Sarah as someone whose success was built on the exploitation of others. Sarah sat there, in a suit that felt too tight around her chest, watching her life's work be dismantled and repurposed into a weapon against her. Michael didn't flinch, not once. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, looking every bit the wronged husband, occasionally dabbing a dry eye for the judge's benefit. After 9 long months of hearings and legal battles, the judge issued his preliminary ruling. The mansion was to be sold, proceeds split. Most of their savings split. Retirement accounts split. And the final, crushing judgment. Michael was awarded 30% ownership in Chun Digital Solutions. The valuation they used was suspiciously low, based on outdated figures that didn't include the new government contract. Sarah was effectively forced to sell her majority stake just to pay the legal fees and Michael's award. The company she had built from nothing was no longer hers. She wasn't surprised by the decision. She was surprised by how empty she felt when it came down. Not angry, not sad, just numb, like she was a ghost watching a play about her own life. Outside the courthouse, she stood alone. Michael and Jessica walked past her, Davenport flanking them like a bodyguard. Michael looked over at her just once. No emotion, no hesitation. He leaned in and whispered it. "You're a pathetic workaholic who wouldn't know love if it came with a user manual." Then he turned and walked away. She didn't chase him. She didn't say a word. She walked to the parking garage, climbed into her car, and sat behind the wheel with her hands still shaking. She had lost her husband, her best friend, her home, and the company she had spent her entire adult life building. But as she sat there, with nothing left to lose, she made a decision. She wasn't done. She sent a text to her lawyer, Arthur Vance. "Don't let them finalize the sale. Not yet. Do the full audit you wanted. The deep dive. I want to know exactly what they took from me." It was a desperate, final move. She didn't know it yet, but it was the one that would change everything. She couldn't face the white walls and stale air of the condo she had rented. Instead, she drove. She didn't have a plan, just a need to get away from the life that had been so thoroughly erased. That night, sitting in her car, the city lights blurred by unshed tears, felt like the end. The preliminary judgment was a death sentence for her career. To pay Michael his 30%, based on a valuation she knew was a farce, she would have to liquidate her controlling shares. Her own company, the entity that was as much a part of her as her own DNA, would be sold off to the highest bidder to satisfy the claims of the man who had betrayed her. Her lawyer, Arthur Vance, was a quiet, methodical man in his late 60s who still believed the law could be a tool for justice, not just victory. He had been against settling, against accepting the initial valuation. "Sarah," he had said, his voice calm but firm, "their numbers don't add up. They're undervaluing your intellectual property. Let's demand a full, independent forensic audit before the final hearing." At the time, she had refused. She was exhausted, emotionally bankrupt, and just wanted the pain to end. The idea of prolonging the fight, of spending more money she barely had, felt like self-punishment. But now, with nothing left, his words echoed in her mind. Her text to him was an act of pure defiance, a final stand on a battlefield where she had already been declared the loser. Arthur called her the next morning. "I'm glad you changed your mind," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "I've already filed the motion. The judge has granted it. The final settlement hearing is postponed for 60 days pending the results of a comprehensive audit and IP valuation." The next 2 months were a strange form of purgatory. Sarah moved out of the mansion, packing 2 decades of a shared life into cardboard boxes. Michael and Jessica were already living there, a fact she learned from a real estate agent. She found a small, sterile apartment and tried to build a new routine. She woke up, drank coffee, and stared at the walls. She was an entrepreneur without a company, a wife without a husband, a woman untethered from every role that had defined her. The forensic accountants Arthur hired were a team of digital detectives. They descended on Chun Digital Solutions, requesting server logs, financial records, email archives, and patent filings going back 15 years. Jessica, as acting CEO, was forced to comply by court order, though she did so with smug obstructionism at every turn. Sarah met with the auditors several times, walking them through her early work, the foundational algorithms she had written in her studio apartment, the patents she had filed under her own name long before the company was incorporated. It felt like digging through an old family album, a painful reminder of the passion and hope she once had. She didn't hold out much hope. She assumed they might find a few accounting discrepancies, maybe adjust the company's valuation by a few percentage points. It wouldn't be enough to save her company. It would only quantify her loss in greater detail. 45 days into the audit, Arthur called. His voice was different. It wasn't calm or methodical. It was electric. "Sarah, you need to come to my office. Right now. And you need to sit down." When she arrived, Arthur's conference room was a hive of activity. The lead auditor, a woman named Maria, stood in front of a large screen filled with complex flowcharts and spreadsheets. "Mrs. Chen," Maria began, her expression grim. "We started by looking for simple valuation errors. What we found was a sophisticated, long-term pattern of criminal fraud." She clicked a button, and a new diagram appeared on the screen. It showed a web of shell companies, all registered in offshore accounts, all linked to one person, Jessica Albright. For years, Jessica had been using her position as COO to embezzle funds. She had been overbilling clients and diverting the excess to her shell accounts. She had been creating fake vendor invoices and paying them with company funds. It was a slow, methodical bleed, amounting to nearly $4 million. Sarah felt sick. The woman she had trusted with everything had been stealing from her from the very beginning. But that wasn't the worst of it. "The embezzlement is shocking," Arthur said, stepping forward. "But it's not the bombshell." Maria brought up another file. It was a series of encrypted emails between Jessica and a lead developer at their biggest competitor. The auditors had managed to decrypt them. In the emails, Jessica was shopping around Sarah's most valuable asset, her proprietary algorithms. Specifically, the revolutionary new software suite that had been the cornerstone of the $50 million government contract. She was planning to sell Sarah's life's work, the crown jewels of the company, for a fraction of their worth, right after the divorce settlement finalized her control. Sarah sank into a chair, her head spinning. It was all a coordinated attack. The affair, the divorce, the character assassination in court. It was all a corporate takeover disguised as a domestic dispute. Michael was the pawn, and Jessica was the queen, positioning herself to capture the entire board. Then, Maria clicked to the final slide. It was a single number. "This is the most important piece of information, Mrs. Chen," Maria said, her voice softening. "As part of our work, we conducted a full valuation of your personal intellectual property. We're talking about the patents you hold in your name alone, the core source code you wrote before incorporating, the foundational technologies that every single one of your company's products are built on. This is your work, separate from the marital estate and separate from the corporate entity. Based on a conservative market analysis, the fair market value of your individual contribution, your intellectual property, is $67 million. Sarah didn't speak. She couldn't. The number just hung in the air, unreal. $67 million. It wasn't just money. It was a number that represented every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of brilliant inspiration. It was the tangible proof of her worth, a worth that Michael had called pathetic and Jessica had tried to steal. It was the ultimate validation. Arthur placed a hand on her shoulder. "The final hearing is next week," he said, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. "The presiding judge is Patricia Morrison. They call her the Hammer of Justice. She despises fraud more than anything. I think it's time we showed them what your life's work is really worth." For the first time in a year, Sarah felt the fog of despair begin to lift. It was replaced by a cold, clear, and powerful sense of certainty. This wasn't over. The day of the final hearing was gray and overcast, the sky matching the mood of the last year of her life. But Sarah didn't feel gray. As she walked up the courthouse steps, she felt a profound calm. She wore a simple, dark blue dress, no power suit, no armor. She didn't need it anymore. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to witness. Inside the courtroom, Michael and Jessica sat at the plaintiff's table, whispering with their lawyer. They looked confident, relaxed, assuming this was merely a formality to sign the papers that would complete their victory. Michael caught her eye and gave her a small, pitying smirk. He had no idea what was coming. Sarah took her seat next to Arthur. He gave her a reassuring nod. A few minutes later, the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Patricia Morrison swept into the room. She was a formidable woman in her 70s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the mountain of paperwork before her. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of the marriage between Sarah Chen and Michael Vance," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "However, before we ratify the preliminary settlement, the court must address new evidence brought forth during a court-ordered forensic audit." At the mention of the audit, Michael's lawyer shot to her feet, but Judge Morrison silenced her with a single, icy glare. "Sit down, Ms. Davenport. You'll have your chance to be shocked in a moment." The judge looked directly at Michael and Jessica. The audit of Chen Digital Solutions has uncovered what this court can only describe as a litany of malfeasance. Specifically, evidence of systematic embezzlement, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud perpetrated by the company's chief operating officer, Ms. Jessica Albright. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Jessica's face went chalk white. Michael stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and horror. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. She detailed the shell companies, the stolen funds, and the emails proving Jessica's attempt to sell the company's core technology. This was not a simple act of greed, the judge declared, her voice ringing with indignation. It was a calculated, deliberate attempt to sabotage and devalue a company for personal gain during a contentious legal proceeding. She then turned her attention to the valuation itself. Which brings me to the matter of the company's true worth, she said, picking up the auditor's report. The previous valuation submitted to this court was, to put it mildly, a work of fiction. It failed to properly assess the company's most significant asset, the personal intellectual property of its founder, Sarah Chen. She put on her reading glasses. The audit has valued Mrs. Chen's individual, non-marital IP, patents and source code that predate the bulk of the company's revenue and her marriage at $67 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Michael looked like he had been physically struck. He turned to Jessica, his eyes wide with betrayal. He had been played just as much as Sarah had. He was a pawn in a much bigger, more ruthless game. Judge Morrison looked down from her bench, her gaze landing on Sarah. For the first time, her expression softened slightly. Then she looked back at Michael. Therefore, this court rules as follows, she announced, her voice like the crack of a gavel. Due to the overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct and criminal fraud directly impacting the marital estate, all claims made by Mr. Vance against the corporate assets of Chen Digital Solutions are hereby vacated and dismissed. The company, and all intellectual property contained therein, are ruled to be the sole and separate property of Mrs. Sarah Chen. She looked pointedly at Jessica. Furthermore, this court is referring Ms. Albright and the entire unredacted audit to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. She banged her gavel. We are adjourned. It was over. Just like that. Sarah didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply breathed out, a long, slow exhale that felt like it carried a year of pain with it. Arthur squeezed her arm. Justice, he whispered. As they walked out, she saw Jessica being quietly intercepted by two plainclothes officers. Michael stood alone, his expensive suit looking cheap and ill-fitting. He tried to approach Sarah, his mouth opening to say something, but no words came out. She didn't wait to hear them. She just walked past him, out of the courtroom, and into the rest of her life. She wakes up most mornings before the sun, just like she always has. Old habits stick. But now, instead of rushing to put out fires or answer to a board of directors, she sits on the balcony of her new home, a modest, modern house overlooking a quiet lake, and listens to the silence. She doesn't need marble floors or million-dollar chandeliers. She just needs honesty, peace, and the kind of quiet that comes without guilt or shame. She sold the Connecticut mansion and everything in it, erasing a chapter of her life that no longer felt like her own. Michael tried to call. He left desperate, rambling voicemails. Sarah, I had no idea. She played me. I made a mistake. I was just so angry at your success. I never stopped loving you. She listened to the first one, then blocked his number. He hadn't loved her. He had loved what she provided. His final words to her on the courthouse steps weren't a mistake. They were the truth of how he felt. She forgave him, not for his sake, but for hers. Forgiveness was the final step in deleting his malware from her system. Jessica took a plea bargain and is now facing several years in prison. The news brought Sarah no joy, only a profound sense of sadness for the friend she once had, the woman who chose greed over loyalty. Upon returning to her company, Sarah called an all-hands meeting. She stood before her 150 employees and told them the truth, all of it. She laid out the betrayal, the legal battle, and her plan for the future. Then she announced the immediate implementation of a company-wide profit-sharing program. This company's success was never just mine, she told them, her voice steady and clear. And from now on, its rewards will belong to all of us. She also made a decision. She took a significant portion of her personal wealth and established the Chun Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs, a nonprofit dedicated to providing funding and mentorship for women starting their own tech companies. She remembered those early days in her studio apartment, the loneliness and the struggle. If she could help even one other woman build her dream without having to sacrifice her soul, then everything she went through would have a deeper meaning. The greatest lesson she's learned is this: your worth is not measured by who you marry or what you own. It's measured by what you create, by the integrity of your work, and by your ability to rebuild when everything is stripped away. The money didn't fix her. It didn't heal the betrayal or erase the pain, but it gave her a second chance, and she used it to become the woman she was always meant to be, before life tried to convince her she was someone else. So if you're watching this and you've been broken, if someone walked out on you or tried to take everything you thought made you who you are, I want you to know this. There's something inside you that can't be taken. Your ideas, your talent, your resilience. That part of you is still there. You just have to dig deep enough to find it. And when you do, protect it. Build around it. Let it lead you home. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story meant something to you, if it moved you or made you think about your own life, I ask you to do 3 simple things. Like the video. It helps more people see it. Comment below. Tell me your story. Or just say what part hit you the hardest. Subscribe to the channel. There's more to come, and you won't want to miss what's next. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of something better. Thanks for being part of it.